I've been on a bit of a redemption kick lately, probably because by the time you've seen this video, I've talked about one Kamen Rider character who's a rotting jellyfish on the path of revenge, and a psychic duelist who had hurt a ton of people with her psychic abilities, but nothing really came from that. So I figured we'd take a different route with today's video and discuss characters who don't really deserve redemption, whether it be in the series or how the public sees them. Though I won't lie, I may also discuss why a character doesn't deserve redemption, or is on the path of it. They haven't gotten in the story, but where they have a basic setup. Why, you may ask? Because I think it's necessary to discuss these sorts of things because sometimes the groundwork is there, but the story doesn't commit to the idea or it falls short. And as an additional note, I want to point out that these are my own takes, they're not fact. I have to say this because when it comes to redemption, it's not going to be a one and done deal, even by an audience standard. So while I will give my own thoughts on the characters in question, I want to make it clear that redemption is a very subjective term and how much you can accept it. You may disagree with my assessments or thoughts with these characters, and that's perfectly fine. Because at the end of the day, we're all dorks who enjoy our media and just want to talk about it. But before we begin, I think it's appropriate for us to set the stage for what I think makes for a good redemption arc for characters. I'm MangaKamen, and
I am the storm that is a pro. Shit. Sorry. I already did that bit. Just start the video.
This is you. This is your badness level. We have to fix that.
honestly, when we're talking about redemption of characters, we're more or less going to be referring to villains. After all, unless your heroes are designed to be monsters themselves, well...
Wow, it looks so real. It even smells exactly like him.
That's gonna be a different conversation. But really, while I'm not against the idea of villains being redeemed, mainly because a lot of you, I enjoy a good villain, obviously. And when we're talking about villains or characters who do terrible things, and when it comes to redemption, I would like to think that most people want that redemption to be earned. Or maybe not, I don't know, I'm just talking about myself here. To me, there are quite a few elements needed to make a good redemption arc for a character work. And this is going to be a long list, so let's go through them so you guys can understand where I'm coming from with the subjects of this video. Or if you really don't care, you can just go to the next chapter. There's a timestamp in the description to do that for those who aren't ruined by YouTube Shorts or TikTok. Let's begin! Number 1. A catalyst for change. What this means is that there needs to be something to actually make the character want to change, especially when it comes to redemption. Some examples are moments of self-realization or being betrayed by fellow bad guys that they trusted are just some ideas. Number 2. Conflict. This one's going to be dependent on how far a character has gone, but a path of redemption should not be easy. Since when you think about it, you want the character to wrestle with their doubts of having to deal with the consequences of their actions. And because of that, it makes the redemption arc feel a lot more natural and not feel like a cheap switch that the writers decide to pull out of their asses. Number 3. Accountability. Again, another one dependent on the character and what they've done, but typically you want to see the redeemer own up to their own actions, and a villainous character who's just accepted without admitting the harm they caused is gonna make the redemption hollow. It shows the internal characters in the audience that the villain is necessary to show that they are willing to change. Number 4. Consistency. And this isn't just for villainous characters looking for redemption, but also the other characters who are targets of accepting them. You don't expect to say, oh, I don't know, a killer like Yoshikage Kira suddenly becoming a reductive member of society after he decided to kill an innocent kid over a sandwich bag. The story actually feels the need to build up the character with smaller digestible shifts in their personalities or focus on their more positive traits. And number 5. Impact and absolution. The character's actions in the past and their pursuit of redemption should matter to the broader narrative and the characters in the story. Something like fighting a greater evil alongside the heroes is a good example, but on that same token, a great redemption doesn't 100% guarantee they'll be forgiven by everyone or get even a happy ending. There should be consequences for their past, and it should not just be forgotten. There are probably other elements of what makes a good redemption story, but most of this isn't going to be a one-for-one. It's easy for a thief-like character to get redeemed because, while theft is a crime in and of itself, it isn't as serious as, say, oh, I don't know, murder? It's all really dependent on the character and how far the story needs to reach in order to make that actual redemption feel natural. And not every redemption arc is going to be the exact same thing. So with all that out of the way, and hopefully you guys understand and know where I'm coming from, let's talk about my expectations for these characters.
Now I'm a little motivated.
I've made it no secret that I'm a huge fan of the Devil May Cry series. Hell, one of the first videos of mine that blew up on this channel was with this very same character we're talking about in this chapter. He's probably going to be on the thumbnail for this one. Virgil. Hell, ask me on the right day and I'll gladly tell you that Virgil is probably one of my favorite characters in the entire series.
And I got a bigger dick.
God, no, not that version of Virgil. There's no redemption for that one. Virgil as a character has that right blend of style, tragic backstory, and is ultimately a badass character that can really appeal to a lot of people. Not to mention with his mimetic energy.
I am the storm that is.
So, what you're saying is the only reason why Virgil is on this video is because of the upcoming DMC anime, right? Yes. Oh, I was expecting you not to admit it. Yeah, I get that. Goodbye. That being said, I do want to talk about the groundwork that Virgil did get in part 5 of this story for redemption. It dances around the concept, but it doesn't really commit and prefers to leave it to the audience. For those who aren't familiar with Devil May Cry 5, what is wrong with you? Go play the game. It's legitimately fun.
King? You? I don't know. I mean, you're a big guy and all, but you seem more like a knuckle-scrapping fart in the wind than anything else. No offense.
But if you're too lazy to play the legitimately fun game, then fine. Prior to the events of DMC5, when Virgil was confined to the role of Nello Angelo, using the powers of the demon sword Yamato, Virgil split himself into two separate beings, his human half V and his demonic half Urizen, the latter becoming the main antagonist of the first part of the game and creating the cliff-off. Yes, the terrible Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetype that was the cheapest strategy back in the day and... Oh, right. Other cliff-off. The demonic tree that feeds on human blood to produce a fruit that will grant anyone who eats it immense power. Eventually, V and Urizen merge back together, creating Virgil, who's trying to continue the initial plan, at least until... Nero, his son, kicks his ass. And after that, both Virgil and Dante descend to the roots of the cliff-off in the demon world to cut the demon tree's powers. This unfortunately would have Dante and Virgil trapped in the demon world. Now, that's a bare-bones explanation of DMC5's plot, but for the purposes of this video, I think it's fine. Besides, the idea for the topic of this video, i.e. redemption, is where we get into more details. Now, I think Virgil as a redeemed character is an interesting case, because while he does have a few traits of a good redemption, I'd argue it falls short. Let's point out the parts where he can honestly be considered at least on the path of redemption. There's the team up with the heroes, the obvious being that he and Dante team up to cut the roots of the cliff off, which Virgil is trying to amend for what his demon half did, and trying to be trapped in the demon world as a sacrifice for humanity. Then there's also the closure where in the post-credits scene we have Dante and Virgil sparring, acting like brothers more than enemies. It gives the vibe that there's a shift in Virgil's personality. I was going to put that Virgil has some reconciliation with his family, i.e. his son Nero, but then I remembered that he ripped Nero's arm off at the start of this whole thing, and then... Father of the Year, everyone! Obviously I joke, but an argument can be made that punching Nero away was to prevent him from stopping Dante and Virgil from sacrificing themselves to be stuck in the demon world or even following them. Plus, Virgil does hint that they will meet again. It hints that Virgil is having his icy demeanor melt like a little bit. But on the other hand, there are points that go against Virgil going through a redemption arc. This can be shown by the fact that he doesn't really have any remorse for his past actions, and his shift is a bit more attributed to stopping a bigger threat. Which leads into the fact that his cooperation is more in line with the fact that Nero kicked his ass and needing to fix things so we can have a rematch and not have an actual drive to fix his mistakes. And the other than the beatdown from Nero, Virgil doesn't really get any actual consequences. Hell, an argument could be made that just because he's trapped in the demon world, he's sparring with Dante and is getting a chance to improve. He doesn't really have any guilt holding him down either. That being said, I can see that this is a very heated debate, as there are parts for him not being irredeemable but also not absolved of what he did. It really all depends on where you stand, and I think there's more of a gray area than anything else, really. The game flirts with Virgil's redemption, but doesn't fully commit to it. Personally, I like Virgil as a character, and if there is a DMC6, I'd rather him be a playable main character from the beginning, and maybe not a straight up hero, but definitely not the villain again.
Hey, it's me, Goku!
It wouldn't be a MangaKamen video if we didn't touch the topic of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think it's appropriate to talk about the levels of redemption, because depending on what a character does is paramount for how hard or easy it is to accept said redemption. So I figured we'd take two characters from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise who got some form of redemption and talk about that. The first would be Kronos from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, and then Leo Akiba from Arc 5. The latter I really want to do a much more focused video on about how he's an idiot and a waste of a villain, but I really want to get this bald idiot just for redemption's sake out of the way. But first, let's get your game on and talk about Kronos, or Crowler. I'm going with Kronos. Kronos is not a major antagonist. He's more of a petty villain than anything else. A professor of Duel Academy who has an elitist mindset, where he hates the students who are slackers, the Slifer Reds, and praises students who are considered elites, the Obelisk Blues. Now, there's one thing to be an elitist snob. It's another thing when your ego forces you to do things like getting a specific student expelled for simply trouncing you at a card game. One such example is baiting our main character Judai to meet with a girl at the girls' dorm at night, and incidentally, near where the girls bathe.
This will be perfect! Thanks to that faux love letter I wrote, Jaden will show up looking for Alexis, but all he'll find is trouble instead. And then, I will have caught him red-handed breaking campus rules.
Which is a stupid plan because the question of how'd you get this photo is a thing. Not that it matters because Crowler's plan got messed up.
Come, Jaden, right into my trap like the slifer sap you are.
Alexis!
That's not Jaden! It's that stammering field spell nitwit!
Yeah, he's kind of an idiot. I don't know how he got that PhD in dueling. And of course, there are other things that happen, like hiring an assassin to take out Judai.
Better than good, and I'll prove it. Not just by scaring this someone, but by banishing him to the Shadow Realm.
Well, alright, if you insist.
Yes. Really. There are a number of other times where Kronos tried to sabotage the main character in the first season, and it did somewhat continue into the second one where he does bicker with the main characters and is trying to get more prestige to the school since he's the temporary chancellor of it. But he does soften over the course of the series, even at one point fighting to prevent the Red Dorm from being demolished. And during the rest of the series, he does become more of a quirky ally from becoming proud of Judai, which is encompassed in a duel between the two, with Kronos becoming emotional at the growth of his student, even having a mirror match of what happened in their first duel.
やっぱりバカの一つ覚えなのね。今やっと分かったのね。みんなと別れるのがこんなにも辛いのは教師である私自身彼らから学んだことがあまりにも多かったからなのね。私はこの3年間にピリオドを打ち教育者としての新しい一歩を踏み出していかねばならないのね。
恩返しデュエル受け取ってくれてありがとなクロノス先生。
教師にとって問題児の方がよく心に残るものだけれどあなたこそ生涯忘れられないドロップアウトボーイなのね。
The show frames Kronos as a proud teacher of his students, which gives the impression of him coming to terms and having an arc. However, consider the facts that he's never really atoning for what he did to Judai and friends, and he changes more to the fact that he's forced to because of circumstances of the plot, which considering it was either be a jackass or be trapped in a different dimension, it's more of an out of necessity than actually wanting to change. Then there's also the fact it's more of a low-stakes redemption. There's always a bigger fish in the pond, i.e. bigger threats like Kagemaru and the Sacred Beasts, Yubel, the Society of Light, and etc. Kronos' exploits are more personal and not as serious, in the grand scheme of things. So there's not much of a demand for him to redeem himself, and for a show like Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, it can work because it's not as serious. Still, it's pretty messed up to lure Judai to the girls' dorm, but in comparison to a full-on villain, petty villains with redemption arcs can get a bit more leeway in that regard because their crimes in correlation are small. Thus, Leo Akiba, the bald idiot. For most of the story of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, Leo is the main antagonist. I mean, this baldy is the one behind orchestrating a war between dimensions with the intent of restoring his daughter Rei, who was split up into 4 girls, and merge the dimensions back into a single one, all the while preventing a great evil from happening. Of course, Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 has to pull a hijacked by Ganon, and the show has an even bigger bad out there, in the form of Zark, who, he's an interesting villain to talk about. Man, I got a lot of video topics to work on, don't I? But yeah, basically, Leo is the man behind the curtain, behind everything, somewhat. Even to the point where he abandoned his new family, manipulated countless people, kidnapped innocent girls, later essentially killing them, and is built up as a cold antagonist from little interactions we do get with the character before the end of the series. And unfortunately, he technically gets redeemed. Kinda. It's more of a quick turn since he shifts from main antagonist to ally, especially when the bigger bad Zark appears and Leo turns to fight the bigger threat. To be fair, it's a threat that Leo has seen before and was trying to stop before the dimensions were split, so it makes sense in that regard, but the bigger issue comes on the tail end of the redemption that I have an issue with. And has to do with the fact that his ambition fails. He's alongside the protagonist at the end of the series that gives the implication that he's forgiven or accepted. Then there's his remorse, or the implication of his depressive state after failing to revive his daughter, even to the point where he was willing to let another character, Shun, punch him. It frames the character as a misguided father, and it doesn't help that the plot shifts a lot of the blame of things on Zark as the true evil, which obfuscates Leo's culpability in everything that happened in this story, but the characters and plot may forget. We need to point out the shitty things he's done. Let's start with the fact that he managed to convince an entire dimension to become his personal army and lead a war campaign against another dimension, turning people into cards so he could flood them into the Ark Project just so he can use them to bring back his daughter. Speaking of, he was willing to sacrifice the 4 bracelet girls, Yuzu, Selena, Rin, and Ruri, who were fragments of his daughter Rei. And he did it without hesitation, which at the same time stripped them of their personalities, identities, and their lives. He abandoned his wife and son, not caring about the emotional damage. Probably one of the stupidest things he did was nurture Yuri. So, you know I keep bringing up Zark? Yeah, he was split into 4 fragments as well, and Leo knows this. He makes it clear that he knows that these fragments and has identified them because they have a card that Zark used. And it was because of Zark that his daughter was sacrificed to save the dimensions. And Leo, as I've stated, wants to prevent Zark's revival. Are you sensing a contradiction here? So instead of doing anything to curb Yuri's cruelty, he turns the kid into a sadistic warrior, and as such enables Zark's revival because Yuri is able to absorb other characters like that. And as such enables Zark's revival because Yuri is able to absorb another fragment of Zark into him. Leo is a dumbass, and the only remorse he has comes after his plans fail, and he never actively atones. No effort to undo the damage, free the victims of the war, or face any sorts of justice. Yeah, he's got motivation to bring back his daughter, but at the grand scheme of things, it's a very stupid thing to do since the guy caused countless suffering and his actions were the cause of bringing back the ultimate evil in the show. It feels like a slap to the face he's just accepted at the end of the story. And for Arc 5, well, anyone who's familiar with my Yu-Gi-Oh content will know that I have a lot of issues with Arc 5, and those issues can stem to Leo's writing. The pacing for the show was wrecked since the 2nd season, and because of that, it rushes through any sort of deserved arc of redemption for the villain, and we're just supposed to accept it. It essentially goes, the plot says he's redeemed, so he is. It's not earned. And there's a reason why I'm including these 2 characters in this chapter other than the fact that they're both Yu-Gi-Oh characters. Because, yeah, both characters don't exactly earn their redemption, and they sure as hell don't want to improve as people to earn it. But considering the severity on what they've done, one's undeserved redemption isn't as noticeable as the others. Not all false redemptions are the same, but again, they can also be set on how far you're willing to accept a character and what they've done. Though if you think Leo was redeemed, then can I have what you're smoking? It sounds awesome.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I think we need a bit of a change of pace and talk about how some people misconstrued what is a redemption arc. Persona 5 and its counterpart Royal are topics I'm not too far from on this channel, even though the games are years old at this point, and with what looks like Persona 6 is a long-form dream for now. God damn it, Atlas!
What the hell is this?
And since Metaphor looks like it's going to be a titan on its own, meaning it'll take a lot of time to dissect, I'm going to stick with the Persona stuff for right now. Anyway, when we're talking about Persona 5, there's just one character who likes to bring up when it comes to redemption, and that would be...
I thought I heard something about delicious pancakes.
I hate you so much.
Now, there is a misconception with this guy, Akechi. You see, we're introduced to Akechi as a charming detective whose goal is to catch the main characters of the game, the Phantom Thieves of Heart. However, it's revealed that Akechi himself is a fraud of a detective and is used as a weapon by one of the big bads of the game. He did things such as killing family members of a few of the main party, as well as other murders that are highlighted at the beginning of the game and throughout so. However, at the end of his story in the original, after the Phantom Thieves defeat Akechi in his own boss fight, the character sacrifices himself to protect the Phantom Thieves from a cognitive version of Akechi, which showcases a bit of remorse for his actions. The problem with this is that a lot of people have interpreted this scene as a redemption for Akechi, even being absolved of his crimes in the process. Now, to me, I have no clue where people got that from, especially when you have lines like this spoken directly in this scene.
I have no intention of forgiving you for what you did to my father. But I sympathize with you. I wholeheartedly understand wanting to get back at the adults who took from you.
But when you gained the power to fulfill that desire, you only used it for your own self-benefit.
If you've got more than one persona, maybe you actually have the same kind of power as Joker's, that you trusted no one. So you only got two personas. One for your lies, and one for your hate. Still, you thought that was enough, right? That part I totally get.
You excelled at everything over us. Yet that was the one thing you lacked.
The cast outright say they do not forgive Akechi for what he did. This isn't a scene of redemption. Akechi isn't looking to be forgiven, and the story certainly doesn't give that impression if you pay attention to the words being spoken and on screen. Akechi's motivations are more akin to his defiant nature, not wanting to be a tool for the bastard of a father who used him for his goals. Not really the same thing as redeeming himself to the cast or the story. Then there's Persona 5 Royal, which takes the time throughout the game to give the players a chance to actually spend more time with Akechi, and they actually fleshed out his confidants as well, where at the end of the main game...
You...
What the fuck is going on?!
Yep, it turns out Akechi is alive! Nope. Turns out this is a cognitive version of Akechi created by the main antagonist of the third semester, but that's another topic for a different video that was made by a handsome YouTuber.
Golly, Kamen, I didn't know that the Germany News Network talked about Persona 5 in that way.
No, me! I did that! I made that video!
Oh, right. By the way, go subscribe to my friend Jermaine.
Anyway, since you, the player, are the only one who's unaffected by the main antagonist's power in this section of the game, Akechi is also the same. But throughout all this, he's saying that he hasn't really changed and is only doing this team-up out of necessity. And ultimately, he doesn't really change throughout this, mainly because this isn't the real Akechi. This is the cognitive version of him that the player character Joker made of him. And it's used to show Akechi is more of a foil to the Phantom Thieves, what they can do with their powers if they were to slide to the other side of the coin of good or evil, when rebellion is corrupted into self-destruction rather than hope. Ironically enough, I like to think that when people are saying that Akechi is redeemed, it's more of a projection of what they want. Oftentimes, when I hear talk about the bad ending of Persona 5 Royal, where everyone is essentially living their best lives, their loved ones alive, and their greatest desires fulfilled, we get a clearly reformed Akechi, someone whose original character is effectively erased, and deleting his agency. Yeah, he's been saved somewhat, but at the cost of everything that Akechi was and stood for. So this really isn't a redemption at all either, but something that people would wish would happen in applying their own cognition to the characters. Ironically enough, considering this game. In the actual ending, Akechi's fate and morality is left in the air, which is obviously left to each person's interpretation, but that's not what a redemption is. It lacks a lot of the factors that we brought up in earlier parts of this video, and ignores the nuance that this story is crafting with its themes of rebellion and free will.
I am Drew, I am Danny, and we are not the same person.
In this chapter, we're going to be talking about a couple of different characters, since there's a good number of times where steps of redemption are outright skipped. And because of that, it can lead to some questions about the character and how the cast is willing to accept them. One example I've been wanting to sink my teeth in for a while would be Kevin Levin from the Ben 10 series. Yeah, I know. I've got some class. If you're not familiar with Ben 10, just listen to the theme song. There you go, simple as that. Kevin is one of the antagonists in the original series, where he was a kid who had the ability to absorb energy, so when he got his hands on Ben's Omnitrix, he was mutated into a combination of all the aliens that essentially made the guy even worse than he was before. Kevin's often touted as a troubled kid, abandoned by his family for being a freak, just putting that out there. In the original series, Kevin is more of a foil to Ben, acting as a reflection of what Ben could become without morals or a good support group. Hey, that sounds familiar.
Delicious pancakes.
In the first series, there isn't much of redemption going on. It isn't until the next one, Alien Force, where the characters are 5 years older and Kevin is a changed person at the age of 16. He spent time in the Null Void, learning to control his powers and anger thanks to a mentor figure. And while he got some shady tendencies and is a real interesting thing with his car...
Look, Gwen, you have to treat a car like you treat a woman.
Go on.
No, I sense I've made a mistake of some kind.
Yeah, no shit.
He's still an ally, here to help Ben and Gwen fight against the High Breed. Now, my complaint is that we don't really see the gradual change in Kevin's character. In the original series, Kevin was willing to harm innocent people and had an obsession with Ben. Hell, there was even an episode where we saw in the future where Kevin was a much more dangerous threat, and even bigger scumbag since he was willing to use his own son as a pawn in his schemes. It feels more like a convenience just to have Kevin be a part of the main cast, and instead of actually dealing with the complexity and time-consuming nature of redemption arcs, it's basically the epitome of tell, don't show, except to show that you want to basically pander to the fans. That being said, it can be argued that after this, there are times where Kevin's redemption is earned over the course of the series. He does struggle with his impulsive and selfish nature. Like when he became Ultimate Kevin and had to deal with an unstable state of being, but eventually gets pulled back from the brink. Of course, I'd still argue that the off-screen growth at the beginning does hurt the redemption quite a bit.
I blame myself.
Because without a lack of build-up for that initial turn, it can be kind of jarring. But in comparison to other characters, Kevin at least got some pushback, and we did see some stuff that showed that there was development. Unlike, say... Let me be clear, the only reason why I'm bringing up Emerald from Ruby is because she's a fascinating case on how to botch her redemption. At least she's a lot better than the diamonds from Steven Universe, but not by much. And that's all I'm saying with Steven Universe. That's why I had to put it in the tags. But Emerald, it really lacks a lot of the elements that make for a good redemption. We're talking about pacing, lack of development, and one of my favorites, the lack of build-up. To the lucky folks who are unfamiliar with Ruby, Emerald is a follower to one of the major antagonists, Cinder Fall, and has been a core part of her character for most of the show. Like, we're talking volumes 2 through 8 here, with the jump to the protagonist side happening in the later half of volume 8. Let's really unfold what Emerald has done before we continue with this. Aside from being a major part of the group of villains that are trying to change or destroy the world, she was a major player in the Fall of Beacon event in volume 3, where the main city and academy that the series took place in was attacked by the series monster, the Grimm. How she was able to do this was thanks to her power of illusion, which manipulated a character named Pyrrha into killing another character, Penny, in a fight. Because of that, it triggered a panic in the crowd, and in turn, the Grimm attacked the city. Yeah, I know, out of context is kind of weird, but please, bear with me for a minute. The takeaway is because of her powers, Emerald was able to lead to the death of a character that was important to the main characters, countless unnamed civilians, and her actions even led to the fall of the city and academy, as well as a powerful magical ability that the bad guys were after. And this isn't just her following orders. This is her being an active participant, and we see no remorse for these actions throughout the entire series. It should be noted that because of these powers, Emerald also framed one of the lead characters, Yang, making it look like she attacked another person unprovoked, and sowed some distrust in the main group. At least for a small amount of time. Now, those are some pretty big things, and I haven't really gone over everything that Emerald has done. The takeaway is that what causes Emerald's heel turn isn't really related to how she feels bad for her actions, but because it's done out of self-preservation, especially since she gets disillusioned with Cinder, someone who saved her from a life of poverty. One can argue this is where the seeds of doubt were planted, which, as I've discussed earlier in this video, is something necessary for a redemption to at least be done correctly. Now, do not take this the wrong way. My issues with Emerald's redemption do not come from her basis. Yes, is what she doing out of preservation? Of course. Does that mean her redemption is bad? No, not inherently and not because of this. Sometimes an act of self-preservation is necessary to grow as a person, but it's necessary to bring up that Emerald is jumping off what she sees as a sinking ship that'll drag her down to the depths, and not because she wants to be a better person. The bigger issue for Emerald's redemption is how quick the protagonists are willing to accept her and work with her. There really isn't any confrontation or emotional fallout because of her presence. One example of this would be the character I brought up earlier, Yang. She was basically treated like a criminal because of Emerald's powers, and while I didn't bring this up, it's logical to assume that if Emerald didn't use her powers to cause the fall of Beacon, then Yang would still be armed. Get it? Because Yang lost her arms in the fall of Beacon event? Armed? Why do I even bother? Now, Ruby as a show is pretty easy to critique, no doubt there. And especially the volume this happened in, Volume 8, had a lot of issues and a lot of things it was trying to do, with a pretty rushed pacing. For example, the city of Atlas falling, Pain being taken over by a computer virus, turned into a real girl, and then... that garbage fire. Or earlier, splitting the party. Volume 8 wanted to do a lot, but it simply didn't have the time to do it correctly. Though I would argue you wouldn't really need a lot of time to fix this issue. A single scene of Yang about to punch Emerald or being forced to stop because it's necessary for... Shut it! You could have a setup for a slower trust-building arc in a future volume, and at the very least, show that the whole thing isn't a one-and-done deal. It is possible to argue that not every element I brought up at the beginning of the video is necessary for a successful redemption, but it depends on the element that you're skipping and how big it should have an impact on the rest of the arc. When you skip stuff like how the character redeems themselves, or there's no reaction to that redemption, that can hamper the arc in my opinion. You know that feeling when you should be working on important things, but you have games that have addictive loops to them, and, well... what can I say? I want to be the king of cans! To get serious, I wanted to end this video off by saying that redemption isn't really a one-size-fits-all ordeal. Shock of all shocks, that this has been an opinion piece where I give my own personal qualifiers. Everything in this video is basically telling you guys what I personally look for in redemption arcs, and how I feel like they're done, or in the case of this video, that I figured aren't done too well, or at the very least are shaky. So I wanted to look towards one of my favorite games that holds a complicated redemption arc, which I think is based on shaky foundation at the very least, and thus, Yakuza Like a Dragon. I still need to do a full-length video on this game sometime. God, I am lazy. Anyway, Yakuza Like a Dragon was one of the newer entries of the Yakuza franchise, with Infinite Wealth being the newest one on the block, though ironically my broke ass can't get that game yet. Still, for all intents and purposes, this is a great game, and one I suggest you guys should get, even if you're not into the whole turn-based combat. Look, this game has a full-on kart racer in it, and it's shockingly competent. Now, if I can stop singing this game's praises and getting hit by cars, let's talk about Masumi Arakawa. A central character in the game was a patriarchal-like figure to the protagonist Ichiban Kasuga, and the lead of the Arakawa family Yakuza group. After Ichiban's foster father passed away, he basically drifted around until he crossed the wrong people and dropped Arakawa's name, trying to scare the goons to letting him go. When the goons tried calling Ichiban's bluff, a total stranger, Arakawa whopped off his own pinky to save Ichiban's life, and that had a lasting impact for Ichiban, to the point where he admired the man. Hey, postscript comment here. For those who are familiar with the game's narrative, yes, I am leaving out quite a few key details here and there, especially some big ones. But for those who aren't familiar with the game, I'm trying to avoid the big spoilers so people who haven't played it can have things to look forward to. I know I typically like to be spoiler-filled in these kinds of videos, but I'm trying to be a bit more considerate in leaving out a few things. But I am going to get into spoilers real soon. Okay, enough of my rambling, let's... My point is that he's the reason that Ichiban joined the Yakuza, and he views him as a great man, giving him undying loyalty. Even to the point where another member of the Arakawa family commits murder, Ichiban was willing to volunteer to go to jail just to protect the family in Arakawa. And what happens when Ichiban gets out? Yeah. Again, there is a plot going on, and while I'm not going to go super deep into it because this is a beefy game, and I'm sure my editor's about ready to keel over from editing already, I want to point out that this was a move by Arakawa to protect Ichiban from the plan of dismantling the Yakuza underworld from the inside by working with politicians to dissolve the power dynamics that would cause the least amount of pain in the process. Though people still died and got hurt in the process, so good on that. The betrayal, quote unquote, by shooting Ichiban was a calculated move to protect the loyal kid. In a sense, Arakawa is trying to break the cycle of violence that the Yakuza have had for decades, and this is only the real big spoiler. Arakawa dies off screen, so you have a bit more of a brutal, abrupt ending. Now, I bring this up because this is a much more gray area with redemption arcs, or if you could even consider Arakawa to be redeemed. After all, while he has a noble goal, he doesn't really fulfill it, and his choices did end up hurting the main character, Ichiban. Plus, again, that was quite the gamble with that. Is he redeemed? Do his intentions make up for what he did to Ichiban? Or maybe his death had a factor in that? This is more or less to ask your guys' thoughts on this matter than to give my own definitive answer or opinion, because that's the thing about redemption arcs and the characters involving them.
So please make sure that you don't step across this line. You've got to be kidding.
Now, I've certainly shown my hand with my thoughts on certain characters in this video, and I'm sure I've gotten already a few comments talking about how I'm wrong about things, or if these characters are redeemed, or some jazz like that, and that's perfectly fine. That's the point I'm making with this video. Redemption arcs are tricky because a lot of them rely on the personal interpretation of the information that we're given to the viewers, and most of the time, that's a highly subjective field. Trying to really gauge a proper way to describe a redemption arc for every character is a hard thing to do, because this is sort of the thing that is on the same level of trying to measure a feeling. Stories are often filtered through a person's unique lens. Now, that doesn't mean you can't call out the times when people leave out information out of the equation they're making their points on, or are using their own interpretation to warp the actual story. But for subjects on how redemption work, there are a ton of factors that go into that. And every element is going to be more or less important depending on the person and the viewer. Do I have my own standards for redemption? Obviously, I do. And you guys do as well, I hope. So, to me, I'd like to ask you guys what you think makes for a good redemption. Who's a character who got a redemption you think doesn't deserve it? And what's your barometer for redemption arcs? Everyone's going to have a different gauge and take on this subject, and I love that. It's what makes redemptions for characters all the more fascinating to me because it can open new possibilities and interpretations. But until the next time, my friends, I'm MangaKamen, and thanks for watching. Later!